Welcome to our club, our class on Hebrew history. We're studying the book of Joshua beginning, and we will study through the 7th chapter of the book of 1 Samuel. In our last lesson, we noticed that the book of Joshua has a special place in it, in the Bible itself, as it relates to the promise made to Abraham. God had told Abraham that I'm going to make a great nation of you. I'm going to give you a land, and through your seed, all nations of the earth be blessed. Last week that out of the seed of Abraham came Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and so forth. And then out of Judah came Joseph. And in order for a nation to exist, there has to be or to have a great land or a great nation, you have to have people. And Joseph was sent down into Egypt in order to, I guess we would say, to build that great nation. 75 people went down, and when they came out some 400 years later, there were 600,000 men of war age that came out, and plus their families, which would amount to several million probably. So the great nation that God had promised was brought about, I suppose we would say, by the work of Joseph in going down to Egypt and later becoming second in command there. And then we have the nation. That nation came out of Egypt, and they go to Sinai, and there they are given a law. In order for a nation to exist, there has to be a law. And the law of Moses was given at that particular mountain, and it was given only to the family or to the nation of Israel, or the Hebrews or the Jews, however we want to refer to that group of people. And then after Moses had given them the law, they went up to Kadesh Barnea, and it was here that Moses sent out the spies into the land of Canaan to see what the land was like, and all of the spies came back and said it was a land flowing with milk and honey. But 10 of them said, we can't take it. Said the giants of Anak are there, and we can't take that land. Joshua and Caleb said, we can take it. Yes, we can. The Lord will be with us. But the people listened to the 10 rather than to the 2. And for this reason, God says, those of you who listen to the 10, you said you are afraid to go in, you won't go in. And he says, for every day that the spies were in the land of Canaan, which was 40 days, every one of those spies or every one of those people would die in the land of Canaan. And they would die in the wilderness wandering. And for 40 years, those people wandered, and it was, they just didn't make it. So they had to, here we have the people have a law, and they have a land, or rather they have a nation, they have a law, and then these people, this nation has to have a land. And this is where Joshua comes in. And last week we looked at the fact that Joshua gathered the people together. Moses was dead, and the people, God placed Joshua in command. And as we studied last week, we talked about the preparation to cross the Jordan, and the deal that was that they had to, all the preparations that they had to cross the Jordan. And then we find that they cross the Jordan. But before they do, Joshua sends 2 spies into the land and into the city of Jericho. And that's about as far as we got in our lesson last week. We studied pretty much verse by verse, and we'll do that. We'll continue that in this lesson. But we got down at about the middle part of chapter 2 or chapter 3, And let's begin this evening with chapter 3 and verse 7, reading it. And we read it last week, but there are a couple of things that we need to note in this particular passage. And the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, I will be with you." So the Lord speaks audibly to Joshua. If you are a careful student, you will notice as you read through the book of Joshua that the Lord spoke to Joshua 13 times personally to Joshua. But in this place, he says that I'm going to be with you, Joshua. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. And that, what a great consolation it is to anyone who is interested in obeying God, to know that if we do obey God, God will be with us. We noted last week that in the last lesson that Jesus, just before he ascended, he told his disciples to go teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. And then he said, "For lo, I am with you always to the end of the world." Always, one translation says, to the end of the age or to the end of the world. Now, when we come to verse 12 of chapter 3, God tells Joshua, he says, "Now therefore take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet of the priest who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off. The waters that come down from upstream, they shall stand as a heap." And it was that way. And then we come to chapter 4, and we will begin reading more or less verse by verse in this particular chapter, having finished our review of last week. "And it came to pass, when the people had come," again we have this third time that God speaks to Joshua, and he says, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe." And this is a repetition of what was said in verse 12 of chapter 3. And he says, take yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, and from the place where the priest's feet stood firm, you shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Now we're going to see in this chapter three different mentions of stones and the purpose of these stones. Remember, they didn't have back in those days, at least they didn't, the law, he later on, or actually he gave the law. He said you're not to make any image of things, and God did not want us to worship statues and man-made things. But here were stones, and they're in the midst of the Jordan. And Joshua says, and God tells Joshua you tell these men to take these stones from out of the midst, one from each tribe, or representing each tribe, and then you'll carry them to the place where you camp out tonight, or where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. Now look at the reasoning, or what the reason was that this was done. Look, verse 6, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Now, the children that would come would not be there. These would be children to be born, or even infant children that had been brought over by their mother or father. But these stones were to be a means of reminding the people, these children, as they grow up and they begin to ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Then you are to tell them. And he said, you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. In other words, whenever time an Israelite came by these stones, which would be there in the Gilgal area, we'll see that in a little bit, that every time children came by, or a family came by, and the children asked their parents, what do these stones mean? Then the parents would tell them. I think we learn an extremely important lesson here, the need of teaching our children. We have a society today that our children just don't know about God. They really don't. It's not a matter of culture. It's not a matter of gender. It's not a matter of race. It's just a matter that our children, because many of them have gone to the hotbeds of liberalism in our colleges and universities, they no longer believe in God, or they don't care. All they want today is, much like the rich man said, eat, drink, and be merry. And that's about all they want to do. And now, this is not true of all children, but each one of us who are listening to my voice know that there are young people today that they don't ask questions about the Bible. You don't see them reading their Bibles. What are they doing? They're sitting there doing this with a iPad or whatever it's called. I'm 81 years old. I grew up before electricity. At least we didn't have it till I was in the 6th grade. So I don't know a lot about these things. But our children just don't know the Bible. And it only takes one generation for people to lose faith in the Bible. So God says, you take these stones, so these people, that as people come by and as children grow up and they see these stones and they ask, you tell them, you teach. One of the primary doctrines of the Bible is to teach your children the way of God. Those of you who are Christians, those of you who are Jews, you teach your children the way of God. And not only teach that way, but you teach them what it means and who did this great thing, and it means that you respect and reverence God for that. We'll see that a little bit more later on. And he says in verse 8, and the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according where they lodged, and they laid them there, or laid them down there. Now here we have at least 3 mentions of this particular pile of stones, or heap of stones, whatever we want to call them. And then we have another group of stones. Then Joshua, verse 9, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, and in the place where the feet of the priest who bore the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. Now, the question that we need to, or the point we need to make, that those stones are not there today. At least I didn't see them when I was there. And but to this day is the day that whoever wrote the book of Joshua, that he said those stones are still there as this letter or this book is being written. And it's pretty sure, scholars are pretty sure that Joshua is the author, except for probably the last few verses of the last chapter that records his death and so forth. But those stones were there, and but these were raised up in the midst of the Jordan, and that is in the middle of the Jordan River. And then verse 10 says, so the priest who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to speak to the people according to all that Moses had commanded them. Joshua and the people hurried across and crossed over. God, time and time again, tells his leaders, you tell these people that to do and obey everything that the Lord commands. And you'll find the word all a lot of times in that. Obey all. We don't have any right to say, well, I'll obey part of it, but I won't obey all of it. And we'll see that not only in the Old Testament, but in New Testament studies. God expects us to do everything, not just some things. It is interesting to me that in the book of Genesis, that God told Noah to build an ark, gave him all the instructions of it, the kind of material, and the last verse of the 6th chapter of Genesis said, thus did Noah all according as God had commanded him. Of your neighbors and friends, or if you preach or teach in the class, it's important to point out that all of God's word that applies to us today has to be obeyed. Now, occasionally you may run into a lady like I did that she said, I believe that you need to obey every command in the Bible. Well, that's a little far-fetched. So I just asked her, I said, yes, and are you in the process now of building an ark? And she said, why no? I said, why not? It's a command in the Bible. She said, but it was to Noah. And I said, you're exactly right. And it's not to us. There are 3 different dispensations, the patriarchal dispensation, the Mosaical dispensation, and the Christian dispensation. And we are under the last days. Anytime you read in the Bible talking about the last days in the New Testament, especially the New Testament is in it is the last days. It says unplugged there. I don't know. Find another. We're stopping it. Unplug that and plug it back up. We got problems here. We'll see what we got. Okay. We have a technical problem. We'll go ahead with this and see what comes of it. And but anyway, it came to pass, this is verse 11, it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priest crossed over in the presence of the people, and the men of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. And we noted that in our last class. So here people are getting ready, or they've already crossed over, or they're getting ready. And then the Lord spoke, or on that night, verse 14, on the day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his. And the priest to bear the ark of the testimony, who bare the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priest, saying, come up from Jordan. And it came to pass when the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched the dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to the place and overflowed its banks as before. Now here we have a similar thing that happened in when the children of Israel came across the Red Sea. That the waters were parted, and then God, when the Israelites all got on dry land, God allowed the water to collapse and drown the Egyptian army that was caught in the middle of the sea. Came up from Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the eastern border, or east border of Jericho. So we're into the land now. We're into the land of Canaan. This is the first time that any of these people have come into this land other than the 12 spies. They came in and they took the 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan. Joshua set them up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we crossed over, that all the peoples of the earth might know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, and that you might fear the Lord your God forever. God wasn't doing a bunch of things just to for people to say ooh and ah. God was showing his might, and no other so-called God had that kind of power, nor has it today. That God was saying to these people, he was saying to Joshua that you need to tell the people to teach their children when their children ask this. And again, we can't overemphasize, especially to our brethren and sisters in Christ, that we need to teach one another. We need to teach our children. We need to teach our grandchildren. I fear my grandchildren, some of them are children of faithful parents that are faithful to the Lord. But some of my grandchildren have never heard a gospel sermon. And there are reasons for that I have no control over, because I just don't, and I won't go into the details. But those children that we do have, children and great-grandchildren, we need to be examples to them and to help them. I'm talking here to older people, younger people who are marriageable age, or when already just getting into marriage. And when the children come along, you need to put it a first priority to teach those children, and they can learn at the age from birth forward. That has been proven in too many cases to deny. They can learn to, and sometimes the first words that some children speak is either God or Jesus, because their parents have brought these in a way that they can understand. And here Joshua says these stones, even though these children won't have been here, but when they see these, they will know that their fathers or grandfathers or forefathers crossed the Jordan River on dry land, because God parted the waters just like he did at the Red Sea. So now we are in the land. However many came in are in the land, and it's a multitude. So we come to chapter 5, and we are it's time to take care of for the people to take care of some business, or some things that need to be taken care of that weren't taken care of in their wilderness wanderings. So it was, when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of Jordan and from before the children of Israel, and we had crossed over, that their hearts melted, and that there was a spirit in them, or there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. And at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives for yourself, and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time. Now, those that came out of the land of Egypt, whether they were males were circumcised at that time, or they were circumcised in Egypt, we know that those who went through the wilderness wanderings, when they came to Kadesh Barnea and they refused to go into the land, and they had to spend 40 years in wilderness wanderings, the older men died, the older people died, but they would have had sons, and when those sons were born, they were not circumcised, and they still had not yet been. So the circumcision was a sign of the covenant that God made with Abraham. And if these people do not go through that rite, then they will not be a part of the covenant. So the Lord tells Moses, or tells Joshua, you make some knives and you circumcise these men that have come out. And they did this, and then it says, and this is the reason why Joshua circumcised all the people who came out of Egypt, who were males. All the men of war had died in the wilderness on the way as they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people who were men of war who came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord had sworn that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then verse 7 says that Joshua circumcised these, and they were at Gilgal. And then it was, so it was, verse 8, when they had finished circumcising all the people, they stayed at their places in the camp till they were all healed. And then, after this, God has taken care of this business, so to speak, and now he says, it's time for you to get busy in your mission of taking the land. Then the Lord said, this is verse 6, or verse 9 rather, this is the sixth time, by the way, that the Bible says that the Lord spoke to Joshua. This is the day, or this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore, the name of this place is called Gilgal to this day. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. This is the first time that these people have observed the Passover in the promised land. I might ask a question, and you don't have to answer it, or I'll ask the question, then I'll answer the question. When was the last Passover of the children of Israel scripturally observed?
At the Lord's Supper.
At the Lord's Supper, when Jesus established, or he instituted the Lord's Supper, that's the last time that the Lord's, or that the Passover was scripturally observed. Now the Jews and the Pharisees and the scribes, they kept doing this for years and nights. God commanded. That God commanded a different thing when he changed his law into the law of Christ. And then it says, and they ate the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Now Moses had said that if they would obey God, that they would be taken into this land of milk and honey. They would eat from vineyards that they had not planted. They would eat the produce of the land, pardon me, olives and so forth, and wheat and barley that they had not sown. And this would be because they would rout out the enemy, they would destroy the enemy or the people in the land, and they would take over the land. And here we find that they did this. Now, when they came out of Egypt, they didn't have very little. And so they began to cry to God that we're hungry and we're thirsty, and God provided. And if you've studied that section, you know that God provided for them the water and the food in the form of manna. But here, after this is when manna ceases, and we don't see the manna anymore. There was a pot of it that was put in the Ark of the Covenant at one time, but this is the last time after they ate this, God did not send the manna any longer. They would have to work for what they had, but it would come from the land itself, the land of promise. And then we have an instance again that is interesting to me, at least. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand, and Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us, or are you for our adversary?" And so he, that is the man, said to Joshua that no, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped him and said, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy ground." And Joshua did so. That bring back any thoughts? Or bring some thoughts to mind? Moses at the burning bush. Moses at the burning bush. And who is this commander of the Lord's army? Now notice the translators, they capitalize the M in man and the H in hand, in his hand. And who would you think this might be?
Well, I would say we'll have to do God.
Okay, I believe that it can be proven, or at least I think it is a good possibility. You know, John says in the beginning of his gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning of God, and all things were made by him, and nothing that has been made that was not made, or that was made without him. Who was this person? He was God. He was called the Word in the Old Testament. I believe that there's enough evidence here to say that this is the Lord Jesus Christ, or this is the Messiah before he becomes the Messiah, so to speak, that he is with God.
And also, we can assume that Joshua wouldn't bow down to a man.
Right, that's a good point. Joshua didn't bow down to a man, and in fact, we are told not to. But Joshua did bow down to this person, and he says, "I'm the commander of the Lord's army." And that might be he was the commander of the angelic army or whatever. But anyway, here is a person with authority, and he tells Joshua who he is, and he says, "Now you take off your sandal from off your foot, because the ground whereon you stand is holy ground." holy ground is only that ground where God is. So we have to, in whether this is the representation of the Father, or the Son, or the Holy Spirit, God, He represents God. He is in the theophany here of God. Now, from this, the people they have now crossed. They've finished their 40 years in the wilderness. They've conquered some of the enemy on the other side, and now they have taken care of getting the people back in a right, especially the men, back in a right relationship with God, to roll away the sin of Egypt and the reproach of Egypt. And now, if Joshua is ready to go into the go to the city of Jericho. Now, in our last class, we noticed that he sent 2 spies, and they spied out the land, and we talked about Rahab and how Rahab had helped these 2 men, and she asked them to help her when they came into the land, and then they told her what to do, and she did it. She hung that red rope out the window, and she was waiting for them to come. And I imagine sometimes I let my imagination run away from me, but I just imagine that Rahab and her family were looking with great anticipation for that army, knowing that what the army had done, and even stating what the army had done or what God had done at the Red Sea and all, and in the other places. And they were looking with great anticipation, and yet probably with a great deal of fear or dread. Will the men remember the promise that they made? But chapter 6 deals with that. Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children. You would really call a city under siege. And then the Lord said to Joshua, and this is the 7th time he's talked to him, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king, and the mighty men of valor." Now look what God said. God said, "I have given." That's have. That's past tense. I have already given you this land. But he said, you go in and take it. What does this tell us about when God tells us about giving us something, and he puts a stipulation on how we are to take something? In other words, we're told that the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared unto all men, Titus 2:11. And we're told that we're saved by the grace of God. We are justified by the grace of God. And in Ephesians and in Romans, Paul has a great deal to say about the grace of God. And then he says that salvation is a gift of God. Does that mean that we can just sit down and say, well, it's a gift of God, so we'll just sit down and wait till he gives it to us? Or do we have certain things to do in order to appropriate that gift or that grace of God? It says here that God says, I have given you the land, or the city of Jericho. It's yours.
He presented it to them, but they had to do something to obtain it.
Yes, they did. Yes.
I was going to say that a gift doesn't do you any good if you don't open it.
Right. I mean, if somebody says to me, I have a $10,000 check awaiting you as a gift here, come by when you can and pick it up. Well, if I never go by, I can't go out and spend that $10,000, can I? No, it's, and you know, this is something that even in the Old Testament we see the workings of God in His principles, that God doesn't give things to people